Let's talk about Donald Trump, Greenland, and American expansion. It is officially official, everyone. As of January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump has been sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. The plans for his first 100 days have already been pretty thoroughly laid out. As such, that won't be covered in this video. If you'd like to learn more about all of that, feel free to check out my previous video on Trump's first 100 days. There is one thing though that my video, as well as anything else on the subject, could have never predicted, and that's Trump's seemingly out of nowhere obsession with American expansion. That's right, folks. All of a sudden, Trump is really into the idea of expanding the United States. To be more specific, Trump seems keen on making Greenland the 51st state of the country. That's not all though. In the past few weeks, Trump has not only made comments about making Greenland a state, but has also claimed he will change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, attempt to take back the Panama Canal, and has even said he wants Canada to join the United States as well. So where is all of this coming from? Is any of this a legitimate possibility? What could the possible impacts of American expansion in the modern era be? In today's video, I'm going to do my best to answer all of these questions. But first, we need to take a couple of minutes to review Trump's claims. The timeline I'm about to give you may not be perfect, but let's go over a very brief history of Trump's claims about expanding the United States. As far as I can tell, these expansionist claims from Trump go back to around late December 2024, at least those about the Panama Canal. On December 21st, Trump wrote his first post about the United States taking over the Panama Canal on Truth Social. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a doozy, but you can see it on screen here. Since that point, Trump began to repeatedly float the idea that the United States should take back the Panama Canal unless the fees for using the canal are lowered. In response to these claims by Trump, Panamanian President Jose Raul Mulino issued an official statement on X, writing that, quote, "I want to precisely express that every square meter of the Panama Canal and its adjacent area belong to Panama, and will continue to be." Trump responded to this specific claim with a few simple words on Truth Social, saying, quote, "We'll see about that." Now let's move over to Greenland, which has actually had Trump's attention for some time now. Back in 2019, during Trump's first presidency, Donald actually floated the idea of buying Greenland for strategic reasons. At that point in time, Greenland's leadership responded with statements that the island was not for sale. That first attempt didn't seem as serious as this one though. In 2019, Trump was cracking jokes about his attempts to buy Greenland, such as when he posted this tweet. This time around, it's really hard to view what Trump is doing as anything but serious. I mean, his own son flew to Greenland on January 7th, and during his trip, he wrote on X saying, quote, "Greenland loves America and Trump. Incredible people with an equally awesome reception. They just want to be able to utilize some of the incredible resources that they have and allow themselves, their country, and their kids to flourish." Let's backtrack for a second though. This trip from Donnie Jr. was about 2 weeks in the making, as Trump's first post about buying Greenland, at least this time around, came on December 23rd, 2024. In that original post, Trump wrote that, quote, "Control of Greenland is an absolute necessity." It's pretty clear that the tone has shifted a bit on this when compared to Trump's first presidency. And much like Panama's president, Greenland's prime minister, Moot Egede, I know I totally butchered that name, I'm so sorry, issued a statement soon after Trump's claims, writing that the island is, quote, "not for sale and will never be for sale." However, just a few days later, Egede said that he was ready to talk to Trump. While the meeting did not take place before Trump's inauguration, it's possible that one could happen soon. It's important to note though that Egede reiterated that Greenland's independence was what they wanted most, saying, quote, "We have a desire for independence, a desire to be the master of our own house. This is something everyone should respect." These dramatics ultimately continued on, and since this is a developing situation, it's likely they'll carry on for some time. But the final thing I want to highlight here is a quote from Trump during a press conference on January 7th, 2025. During the presser, both the Panama Canal and Greenland were brought up. When a reporter asked Trump if he could guarantee that he wouldn't resort to military or economic pressure to take control of Greenland or the Panama Canal, he responded, quote, "No, I can't assure you on either of those two." I'll touch more on what that could mean for all parties involved later on. But first, I want to talk about Canada. Republicans have fired off posts on social media about making Canada a state as well. Ultimately, this stems from Trump threatening Canada with tariffs. In early December 2024, Trump suggested to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that if Canada can't handle US tariffs, it should become the 51st state in the country. Of course, it's possible that Trump was just joking around with the Prime Minister, and this may not even matter because Justin Trudeau has resigned from his position as of January 6, 2025. Regardless, even if Trump was joking, he continued to push for Canadian statehood in later posts. For example, on December 18th, he wrote wrote that, quote, "Many Canadians want Canada to become the 51st state. They would save massively on taxes and military protection. I think it is a great idea. 51st state." All in all, Trump has also made posts like this, and this, and this, and all of these. Clearly something is afoot, and even if this is all one big joke, let's take Trump seriously for the purpose of this video. We'll talk about the potential impacts of all this possible expansion in a few minutes. For now though, let's address the elephant in the room. How likely is it that any of this actually happens? The answer to this question is yes, at least technically. It's still possible for the United States to expand. If the US were to annex Greenland or even somehow annex Canada, the government could turn them into US territories or even US states. That's not to say it's likely at all though. In fact, in terms of likelihood, the odds of something like that actually happening are pretty close to zero. As I've already mentioned, Trump is threatening Canada pretty heavily with tariffs and reportedly told Trudeau that if Canada wants to avoid them, they should just join the United States. Well, it turns out he's taking a similar strategy with Greenland. On January 7th, Trump made his first threats of tariffs to Denmark. Why Denmark? They actually own Greenland. While Greenland is self-governing, the land is owned by Denmark. This means that Greenland technically can't just join the US even if it really wants to. The negotiations would have to go through Denmark, hence why Trump is threatening the Danes with tariffs now as well, and is saying he will implement them unless they give up control of Greenland. I'm not a foreign policy expert by any means, but it doesn't seem super likely that this path would guarantee Greenland joining the United States. What could actually work though is simply throwing a ton of money at Denmark and making them an offer for the land that they can't refuse. Now, it's hard to say just how much Greenland would actually cost. As of 2021, the island had a GDP of just over $3.2 billion. It obviously wouldn't be a cheap purchase, but it also wouldn't be anything that the US government couldn't afford. In 1946, the United States tried to buy Greenland for around $100 million. Today, that amount would equate to around $1.6 billion, so that's one estimate, but my guess is that it would be a bit more expensive as things have changed a lot since 1946. The overall point here is that if Trump is truly intent on buying Greenland, he definitely could. The main roadblock would be convincing leaders in Denmark to sell the island, which is where his threats of tariffs come in. We'll discuss what those tariffs could do in the next section of this video, but for now, let's talk about the Panama Canal. Some quick history here. When the Panama Canal was first built, the US government actually had full control over it for a few decades. However, in 1964, anti-American riots broke out in the US-controlled canal zone. These riots ultimately led to the Panama Canal treaties being renegotiated, and that ultimately resulted in the US giving up control of the canal by 2000. In 1999, the US handed over full control of the canal to Panama, and that's how it remains to this day. But could a Trump-led United States take back control? Probably not. It's extremely difficult to imagine sending actual troops on the ground to take the canal back, and the treaties that were ratified by the Senate in 1978 established permanent neutrality of the canal. Instead, it's far more likely that Trump's threats are once again a negotiating tactic to lower rates that ships pay when they pass through. As for Canada, once again, that's not happening. Even if Trump decides to lay heavy tariffs on the Canadians, I just don't see a way that Canada would become a state, or even multiple states. They're far too big of a country in their own right to just assimilate into the US. But now it's time to have some fun and ask some questions. If Trump truly wants to bully his way into acquiring more land, what impact could his actions have? If the US did somehow expand, what would happen? It's now time to find out. Let's get into it. This section is going to kind of be divided into two parts. One part will focus on Trump's plans, and the other will dive into what things would actually look like if the United States were to acquire all of this land. So first up, let's quickly talk about Trump's tariff threats to Denmark, and his more general threats to Panama. I've already discussed the impacts that tariffs on Canada will have in another video, but to briefly summarize, Trump's potential tariffs on Canada threaten to significantly reduce its GDP, disrupt key supply chains in automotive and agriculture, increase consumer prices, and more generally strain relations with them. They would pose challenges to Canada's energy and lumber exports, and probably prompt retaliation. In other words, it could cause a lot of havoc. Now let's turn to Denmark. High tariffs placed on Denmark would probably have similar results for the Danes as it would the Canadians, but for different reasons. Economically, Denmark somewhat relies on exports to the US, as many other countries do. Interestingly though, key products coming from Denmark include pharmaceuticals like insulin and weight loss drugs like Ozempic, as well as hearing aids, a sector where Denmark is a global leader. So if tariffs were to actually go into effect on Denmark, it's likely that the supply chain of many of these pharmaceuticals and medical devices would be disrupted. That's not ideal, and it's a big reason why many people believe Trump is simply using these tariffs as a negotiating tactic and isn't super serious about implementing them. As for Panama, Trump hasn't threatened tariffs to take back control of the canal, but as I've already mentioned, he didn't rule out using the military to take it back either. While an invasion of Panama to regain control of the canal would likely be pretty quick given the size of the US military compared to Panama's, it would also probably lead to a lot of domestic and international backlash. Generally speaking, the world has never looked upon imperialism too kindly in the modern era. Obviously in the past it was different, but right now it's frowned upon by most. I have a good feeling Europe wouldn't really approve of the US's actions if it were to invade Panama and slam Denmark with tariffs, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyways, let's now have a bit of fun and visualize this expanded United States. The United States on its own currently has a GDP of more than $27 trillion. With Canada and Greenland added, the GDP would grow to more than $34 trillion. The US also already has the strongest military in the world, but it would grow even stronger with the addition of Canada and Greenland. In other words, in terms of economic and military prowess, the US would just grow even stronger than it already is now, which means this exercise isn't as fun as I initially thought. The most interesting impacts of this hypothetical expansion though would come on the political side of things, and I think this is a big reason why most Republicans should be hesitant about making a move like this. To begin, according to the Environics Institute, Canadians were 3 times more likely to prefer Kamala Harris in the 2024 election than Trump. To add to that, 60% of Canadians said they would prefer any Democratic candidate to Trump, while only 21% said they would prefer Trump to any Democrat. We also just need to generally think about what social policies Canada already has in place that differ heavily from the US. Abortion is legal and free throughout Canada, and there are no laws that restrict it. Canada has a universal, publicly funded healthcare system. Canada has some pretty strict gun laws in place, and while not all weapons are banned outright, firearms are federally regulated. Those are 3 pretty huge differences compared to the United States. If Canada were to become a state or multiple states, most people would be voting blue in local and general elections. Greenland would be a similar way as well. Their healthcare system is also publicly funded. The country sees 84.7 abortions per 1,000 women yearly, which is the highest abortion rate in the world. They have incredibly strict gun laws as well. Given Denmark's reputation for progressive politics overall, it's no surprise that some of that has spread to Greenland. Overall, both Canada and Greenland would be pretty progressive additions to the United States. These additions would not only throw off the entire balance of how the current US election cycle works, but it would also heavily favor Democrats. If Trump were truly serious about acquiring both of these countries, he could inadvertently shift the political power in Washington, and that's exactly why Republicans should be hesitant about this. Only acquiring Greenland would be a different story, but it would still have some political impact if it were to become a state and be able to vote in US election. One final thing to consider as well, the process of making a territory into a state is one that runs through Congress, and I don't know that Democrats in Congress would give in to Trump's demands of making Greenland a state unless they were getting something out of it as well. What would they want out of it? How about giving Puerto Rico statehood? Puerto Rican statehood has been a topic of discussion for a while. It's been a US territory since 1898, and with Republican calls for making Greenland a state, many on the Democrat side are renewing calls to make Puerto Rico a state as well. Colorado Governor Jared Polis took it one step further, writing on X, quote, "If it's the choice of the people of Greenland to join the greatest country on earth, I would welcome them as our 53rd state, right after we admit Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states. D.C. becoming a state probably wouldn't work for reasons I can't really go into in this video. However, Puerto Rico is again in discussion. If Republicans are truly intent on making Greenland a state, it's possible that Democrats will use Puerto Rican statehood as a non-negotiable. So why exactly does Trump want to do this? What is his true reasoning? Does any of it make sense? It's time to find out. As I've mentioned throughout this video, Trump's threats of tariffs toward Denmark are likely just threats to gain more ground in negotiations with them. But if Denmark isn't willing to give up control of Greenland, then what is Trump trying to negotiate for? It's fairly simple: military presence. Since all of this first started, the reason behind Trump's demands has been different forms of security. For Greenland, Trump claims acquiring the land is needed for national security. For the Panama Canal, Trump says the US needs that for economic security. Canada is a different story altogether though. He probably wants that for a variety of reasons. But anyways, back to Greenland. Trump's recent obsession with the island comes down to its strategic potential. More specifically, it's got a lot of great attributes that are growing in importance. As Christina Liu writes for Foreign Policy, quote, "For one, the island is home to ample and undeveloped deposits of the powerful rare earth minerals that underpin advanced weapon systems and many clean energy technologies. Although experts stress that there remain many challenges to extraction and production. In the Arctic more broadly, a 2009 US geological survey found that the region could contain some 30% of the world's undiscovered gas and 13% of its undiscovered oil. To add to that, the US is generally playing catch up in the Arctic. While they are technically an Arctic nation thanks to Alaska, both Russia and China have broadly expanded both their military and economic presence in the region. So basically, Trump is looking at Greenland as a way to catch up to Russia and China, so to speak. Acquiring Greenland would give the United States great strategic position in the Arctic, as many key shipping routes run through the area. However, as I already mentioned, Greenland has expressed its desire for independence. What's far more likely in this scenario is that Greenland secures independence from Denmark, and rather than becoming a US state or territory, merely negotiates with the United States and Trump to allow for increased military presence on the island. That's just my prediction though. In reality, this could go plenty of different ways, and I could be totally wrong. At this point, we'll just have to wait and see what happens next. If this Trump presidency is anything like the first one, the official motto for it should be expect the unexpected. Obviously, Trump has a real plan, and it's likely that he'll stick to that plan for the most part, but every now and then it seems like he likes to throw a curveball to keep us on our toes. His theatrics with Greenland, the Panama Canal, and Canada are exactly that. We don't exactly know what will happen with Greenland yet. It's possible they secure independence from Denmark and Trump will be able to negotiate a stronger military presence on the island. I wouldn't expect it to become a US territory or state, because if Trump gets what he wants in terms of an increased presence on the island, then that status wouldn't be needed. Even if Greenland doesn't secure independence, there could be a workaround in negotiations with Denmark where an increased American presence on the island is still secured. Like I just said, we'll have to wait and see. As for the Panama Canal, I don't even know what to think about this. I highly doubt a US military invasion of Panama is coming, but Trump may threaten the country with tariffs too if they don't want to sell the canal. That's the most realistic alternative I could see happening, considering he's already threatened Denmark with them. We'll likely get an answer about his next steps very soon. Alright, that's all I've got for today. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to like and subscribe. More videos coming soon. Additionally, if you're interested in learning more about this topic, please feel free to check out my sources in the description down below. I highly recommend doing so if you have the time. Thank you so much for watching and for all your continued support. I really appreciate it. Hope I see you again soon. Take care.